Over the next few days, Alex found himself in a dizzying whirlwind of activity, frantically exploring the newfound power at his fingertips. Armed with his ability to travel through time, he set about methodically laying the groundwork for his transformation from social outcast to wealthy, respected member of the elite. First, Alex began experimenting with small, targeted jumps into the future, carefully observing the ebbs and flows of the stock market. By meticulously studying the patterns and trends, he was able to anticipate major fluctuations with uncanny accuracy. With each temporal leap, he would return to the present and invest his meager savings in the most promising stocks, watching in awe as his portfolio grew exponentially. As the weeks turned into months, Alex's wealth began to accumulate at an astonishing rate. He would travel forward, sometimes by mere days, sometimes by years, strategically fine-tuning his investments and capitalizing on the subtle shifts in the financial landscape. It was a delicate dance, one that required unwavering focus and an almost preternatural understanding of the complex interplay of global markets. But Alex was undaunted. And so, Alex began to strategically deploy his financial resources, carefully orchestrating his ascent into the upper echelons of Oakwood Prep's social elite. First, he upgraded his wardrobe, replacing his worn hand-me-down clothes with a meticulously curated collection of designer apparel. Then he began showering his newly acquired friends with lavish gifts, the latest smartphones, high-end electronics, even exotic sports cars. The response was immediate and gratifying. Where once he had been ignored or ridiculed, Alex now found himself the center of attention, his peers fawning over his newfound wealth and status. Evan and his cronies, once the undisputed kings of the social hierarchy, now eyed Alex with a mix of envy and grudging respect, their once haughty demeanor giving way to a newfound deference. As Alex basked in the adulation of his classmates, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. Finally, he was being recognized and appreciated for who he was, not just the sum of his family's meager resources. The constant taunts and humiliation had been erased, replaced by a sense of belonging and acceptance that he had only ever dreamed of. But even as he reveled in his triumph, Alex couldn't shake the persistent feeling of unease that had begun to creep into the periphery of his consciousness. There was a nagging sense that somehow he had compromised his principles, that the means by which he had achieved this success were not entirely pure. After all, he had effectively rewritten the timeline to serve his own selfish desires, manipulating the future to his own advantage. The ethical implications of his actions weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder that his newfound popularity and wealth had been built on a foundation of deceit and temporal tinkering. Yet, whenever these doubts crept into his mind, Alex would quickly push them aside, reminding himself of the blissful feeling of finally being accepted and respected by his peers. The thrill of being admired, the joy of social inclusion. These emotions were too powerful, too intoxicating to be suppressed by mere pangs of conscience. And so Alex buried his misgivings, diving ever deeper into the opulent world of the Oakwood Prep elite. He attended extravagant parties, hobnobbed with the children of influential businessmen and politicians, and reveled in the trappings of his newfound status. Designer suits, luxury sports cars, and the latest high-tech gadgets became the outward symbols of his transformation, a visual representation of his triumph over the social barriers that had once confined him. But as the months passed, Alex began to notice a curious shift in the nature of his relationships with his newfound friends. Where once they had showered him with genuine warmth and enthusiasm, now their interactions felt increasingly superficial, tinged with a barely concealed opportunism. He would catch them eyeing his designer accessories with thinly veiled envy, or gushing over the latest high-end gift he had procured for the group. It dawned on him that, for all their professions of friendship, his peers were primarily interested in his wealth and the status it conferred, rather than in Alex himself. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, and he found himself grappling with a growing sense of disillusionment. Had he simply traded one form of social isolation for another, swapping the derision of his former tormentors for the hollow adulation of those who valued him only for his material possessions? As the guilt and uncertainty continued to gnaw at him, Alex began to withdraw, retreating from the social whirlwind he had so carefully cultivated. He would find himself staring out the window of his family's newly acquired mansion, watching the sleek sports cars and well-manicured lawns with a growing sense of emptiness. What was the point of all this wealth and popularity, he wondered, if it had not brought him the true sense of belonging and acceptance he so desperately craved? Had he not simply traded one form of social isolation for another, his superficial friendships as hollow and ephemeral as the material trappings that defined them? These were the questions that now consumed Alex, as he found himself grappling with the consequences of his own temporal manipulations. The future he had so carefully crafted was beginning to unravel, and he could no longer ignore the nagging feeling that he had somehow betrayed the very essence of who he was.